right. Once again, I'm talking to you guys on what they say versus what you say in agile delivery. And just like when I think about the whole topic of what people say versus what we say, it's very interesting, really, really, really very interesting, because a lot of times we think that when we try to drive changes, agile changes in our organizations, in our teams, and we meet a little resistance, we think that's enough. We think that we have reached the bus stop, or reached a palpable stop. However, no one no one owes us a change if you think about it in the right sense. These are software teams that have been developing softwares for years and years, even before the emergence of Agile. So when you talk to them about, hey, we need to drive this change, we need to improve our testing environments, we need to include some stuffs in our definition of done and our definition of ready before we kind of say our stories and our issues and our tags, our spikes are ready. Before we get to that place of conversation, people really don't have to listen to you. And we're going to go through what they say to us. And these are some of the examples, and these are some of the things we have received when we have tried to drive agile changes in organizations, and some of the resistance that we have faced, and some of the things we should have said that we did not say. So we'll kind of go through them. I must also say this, that the list is very endless. So you will always find out that there's so many things, so many rebuttals and resistance that we might face in the course of doing our jobs that are totally different from the things I have on my slide here. But we'll go through some, have some nice conversations around it, and we should be great. I promise you, this training was supposed to be for an hour, then Q&A, but it might wrap up a little bit sooner than that, depending on how we move. All right, so hello guys, everyone. My name is Chibuzo Anyakora. A lot of you all know me as Buzi, and that's fine. The pronunciation is Chibuzo. It's funny because, you know, I live in North Carolina, and this is 7:09 p.m. the United States. I remember, you know, every time I look at my name when I started growing up, and when I was working, and I had to explain myself, explain my name. The word Chi stands out for me because it means the Asian god of peace. And I started by telling people that my name was Chi, and then I started going by Buzi, and then so it's like the Asian god of peace with Buzi. Buzi means a pathway. So I later got a preference to go by Buzi, and that's why I encourage people to call me Buzi. So the spelling is pronounced Chibuzi. Find me on my LinkedIn page there, and that's the meetup page that we currently run with some Scrum Masters. Next slide. All right. So before we start talking, let me kind of share some things with you. So one of the things I found out in my short journey as a Scrum Master, so let me a little bit about myself real quick. So I started off as a project manager in Nigeria, which is my home country. I started off in Access Bank. It's a bank they call Access Bank, as a project manager. And then I got introduced to Agile when I moved over to the States. I've worked with some of the best financial institutions here in America. I've worked with Woodforest National Bank, PNC Bank, SunTrust, Infosys, True Fidelity Investment, and I currently work for Blue Cross Blue Shield. So, you know, when you think about the stances of a Scrum Master, and this is during my long engagements with different Scrum Masters, even Scrum Masters I've worked with, and Scrum Masters I meet in some spaces. When you think about the engagements, I'm just gonna slide right back, all right. When you think about some of the engagements I've had with them, I found out that a lot of them play the other roles. They are great facilitators. They are great teachers. They are great mentors. They are great impediment removals. They're so great. One key critical stance that a lot of Scrum Masters do not play is that of a change agent. And there are too many reasons, there are multiple reasons why we could think about why Scrum Masters are not really change agents. Some of them are organizational blockers. Some of them are more trust blockers set up by divisions and programs and portfolios that is kind of beyond the team space, and they really cannot effect any change in the team because of those blockers. Um, so we'll talk around some of those blockers. We'll talk about some of those things and how, as a Scrum Master, how you can begin to set yourself and start effecting changes that are kind of beyond the team level into the portfolio, the program, the division, the value stream level. We'll have great conversations around that. So the whole conversation, or the crux of this whole presentation, will kind of be around the change management side, because when I think about change management, I think about someone is you're trying to effect a change. If you kind of unbundle or unpack the word change management, you see that it's all about someone is trying to effect a change. And I have it here from medium.com. It says, whether you call it management or not, change agents are supposed to cause change, you have to cause a change. The organization is having some dysfunctions, or they're actually not doing things the right way. They're testing SOC, or they don't have best practices in terms of some of the architectural frameworks, or they don't have best practices in analysis, in design, in build, in testing, in retirement support, wherever part of the SLDC software development lifecycle process, and they're having anomalies there and things are not working fine for them. You want to cause change across those areas. They help organizations and teams to inspect and adapt. So we talk about inspect and adapt being one of the last piece of the Agile feedback loop, the life cycle. You always want to make sure that organizations have a chance to learn from their mistakes. They have a chance to kind of retrospect on themselves. And this is cuts across them, whether it's from the team level to the program level, the value stream, regardless, they have a chance to really take a step back and kind of reformat, for the lack of a better term. When you do all that, those are the things that lead to change. However, you will see that change has to be intentional. Change is not something that happens, it just falls out from the blues, or it just comes out from the skies. Changes have to be intentional. For any good change to be effective, they have to be intentional. They have to be aimed to be effective. So the next slide, we're going to look at some of those anomalies. What are some of those things that we have heard? And I termed it what they say. What are some of those things that we have heard in the course of driving agile changes and driving deliveries within our teams? And how are some of our responses? How are some of the ways? What are some of the things we have said? But first of all, we're going to go through, once again, it's not a very holistic list, but it's some of those things that I've had in the course of my career. I've had different job titles and different job portfolios, and people in organizational seats say to us that you could target anti-agile, or they were just not the right things to say at that time. All right, my slide changes. Okay, all right. So what they say, we're going to go over developers, we're going to go over product owners, we're going to look at stakeholders, people leads, functional managers, program managers, portfolio leads, and literally anyone. What are some of those things they say to us? And we kind of go over them, and then a couple of slides down, we will go over what you should say to them. All right. All right. So in the course of driving up things, developers tell us all the time. I'm sure a lot of you are cringing when you guys see I don't have time as the number one, because that's like the number one thing developers say to us all the time. I don't have time. They don't have time for anything. You don't have time for your working agreement ceremonies. You don't have time for your definition of done meeting. If you want to do rescoping or project milestone gathering, requirements gathering, they don't have time. You don't have time definitely for your agile ceremonies. You don't have time for your stand-up. Everything takes away the time. Everything literally takes away the time of the developers. All what they want to do, just exactly like the picture says, they want to face their computers and plug in the code, which is great, which is exactly the reason why they were hired. All right. So they say that all the time. You try to drive any change, I don't have time. Hey, can we meet together to talk about this? I don't have time. I don't have time. I need my block of time. I need to focus time. I need my focus time to do my work. All right. Another thing they say all the time is, why do I have to talk to my fellow developer to do my work? Remember we talk about cross-functionality as one of the very critical components of Agile. We think cross-functionality helps teams to be able to make the right decisions and make informed decisions all the time. It also breeds collaboration amongst people when developers cross-communicate and they have great collaborations among themselves. One key critical definition of DOM component is peer programming. And peer programming is a clear, good example of team collaboration, developers communicating and collaborating among themselves. 2014, I was at an engagement in PNC, and we were driving some changes with a value stream. I was a Scrum Master for a bunch of teams, and we had met earlier on and talked in our definition of DOM to include peer programming and peer programming as one of those things that we should do to ensure that different engineers get to know what the other engineer is doing. Just can just walk side by side and bounce off each other. That was one of the major hurdles we had, because the developers were like, hey, why do I have to talk to the data viz? We're like, hey, why do I have to talk to the data engineer? And data engineer is like, hey, why do I have to talk to the architect? Architect is like, hey, I don't need to talk to the inside consultant. That's a major hurdle all the time. Now, it's a little bit different if you're working in a silo team that the work is very much independent. An example could be some Kanban teams, very independent teams. Everyone's work type and his work portfolio is really, really different. The architect does the initial mapping and moves it to the engineer who builds out the modeling. So everyone's work is clearly articulated and mapped out. Makes a lot of sense to have work broken out. But if the teams to work together, the team is a cross-functional team, it's great to drive those changes together with it. It's great to drive those changes and have them collaborate. And when you try to drive those communications by saying, hey, talk among yourselves, use the comment section, tag yourselves on your tracking tool, whether it's Jira, version 1, whatever, Azure, whatever it is. They don't want to do all that. So these are some of the things you will get all the time. These are some of the things we get all the time, all right? So we get that. Why do I have to talk to my fellow developers to do my work? These are some of the things developers say to us. I don't have to talk to the data engineer. Why do I have to talk to them? And some of the times they are organizational blockers. Because take, for example, if the organization is promoting the specialist mode rather than the generalist mode, you will face this and more. Because when we say the specialist mode, what we're saying is that we are asking all the lines of work, for the lack of better term, the analytical lines of work to focus on their line of specialty and don't work on anybody's work, but just stay siloed on your work. That breeds some kind of specialization, which is good, and efficiency. But the whole concept of Agile is to ensure that when someone drops the ball, someone wins the lottery and leaves, or whatever happens to anyone, the team is on autopilot. The team is still able to deliver functionality to the stakeholders and as at when due. All right. So that could be an organizational blocker if the organization is promoting the specialist rather than the generalist mode. All right, next slide. All right, we're going to look at what the product owner says. All right, you can see the little product owner, over there. I can run all the ceremonies. Why do I need a Scrum Master? Why do I need a Scrum Master? I can run, and literally I could run all the ceremonies. I don't really need a Scrum Master. Also, and I'll come back to it again. you see product owners say, I can assign issues to the developers. Why do I have to make them just pick issues from the backlog when I can just go ahead and assign it to them? I already know what they're working on. I can just as well just assign it to them without waiting for them to pick up work from themselves. These are some of the anomalies we receive. Mind you, we're looking at what they say. Your presence as a Scrum Master, your presence as someone driving agile changes in your organization does not preclude you from the fact that people would say things that may not be right. So you don't fold or you don't cringe under because, oh, they have said this to me. You're supposed to be a change agent and you're supposed to cause change. So I'm going to try to say it again. All right. So that you are a Scrum Master, you're an Agile delivery lead, you're an Agile coach, you're helping drive, you're a product owner, you're helping drive Agile changes to your organization. It does not necessarily mean that you won't meet oppositions, you will meet restrictions, you will meet blockers, you will meet people who will say things that necessarily you don't like, necessarily don't make sense to you, all right? It doesn't necessarily mean that will be the end of it, all right? So a lot of time I made when I took on one of my first engagements, not one of my first engagements, one of my last engagements in 2018, the product owner told me, hey, she told me exactly that. She said, I literally can run all the ceremonies. That why are you here? So she said, why was I there? I said, okay, I'm here to now technically not just run your ceremonies, but also help identify gaps and offer my suggestion on how we can kind of bridge those gaps. So my joining this team is essentially not just to run your ceremonies. Agile facilitation is just one piece of my work. It's just one piece of my large job description, right? So if you want to run the ceremonies, you can run the ceremonies, you know, but you running the ceremony doesn't mean I cannot help identify gaps with the teams. So this was a frank conversation that I needed to have with the product owner to let her know that it's not just about the ceremonies. And that's why I'm really, really, really keen on talking about being a change agent. Facilitation is great, but it's just one of your stances, sir. It's just one of your stances, ma'am. It's just one of your many job descriptions, one of the many responsibilities you have as a driver of change in Agile, all right? So you need product owner who tell you that as a Scrum Master, if you're starting out or you've been practicing, hey, I could do this. Why are you here? Down the slide, we're going to look at some of the right things that you need to say to them. But now we're looking at what they say. And this is all the crux of this whole training, guys. When we go over what they say and what you should say, training is over. Have some question time, have some time to go back and front and answers, and then it's going to be a wrap. Product owners say I can assign issues, you know, to developers. Why do they have to wait during the sprint planning for them to take on issues by themselves when I can as well just I know what they're working on, so I can just put it on their assigning to them. All right. So they tell us this all the time. They tell us this all the time. It's your duties to kind of recognize that they might tell you this, but you need to probably have the right answer when they tell you that. All right. When they tell you that. All right. I think my slide keeps moving out. Let me see. All right. Stakeholders. All right. So stakeholders, and maybe I should kind of explain who they are. I'm sure you guys know who the developers are, the people who actually build the functionality that we present to the stakeholders. The product owner is actually the person who gives us prioritization, who converses and holds frequent engagements with the stakeholders to understand what's the most value to them and how to kind of articulate the work. And the stakeholders are the people responsible for the work we are doing, and the people we actually demo the functionality to. They're the people who actually own the business in many ways, all right? Depending on your organization you are. Sometimes the stakeholders will say, I don't have time. I don't have time to come for your review. So therefore you keep carrying your story sprint on sprint. I don't have time to come for I don't have time to give you any requirements. I don't have time. I don't have time. You know, my calendar is filled up, it's maxed up. We get all the things. These are some of the things they say to us. I don't have time. I know what I want, but I don't know what I want. I can see some members of my group here. We talk about this all the time, guys, that stakeholders, they don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want. It's very critical that everyone understands this now. And stakeholders, most times, they don't know what they want. They don't know. When you come up before the sprint planning, during your sprint, your stakeholders engagement or your stakeholders requirement meetings, and tell them, hey, stakeholders, this is what this is the story you want. How do you want us to build it? Just, I don't know. Just go and work. They don't know what they want most times, but they know what they don't want. The moment you give them something substandard, the moment you give them something that doesn't work or doesn't fulfill their needs, they'll say, oh, we don't want this. Reject, decline, build something else. Sometimes the prototypes we give them is what stimulates them to think out of the box to give us the requirements. So get prepared when you're trying to drive changes, regardless of your role. Ladies and gentlemen, regardless of your role, whether you're a Scrum Master, whether you're an Agile transformation lead, whether you're an Agile coach, we all are stakeholders in driving organizational agility and in different levels. At the teams level, the program level, organizational level, divisional level, we all are responsible for driving those agile changes. So you will always see stakeholders who will tell you, we don't know what we want, or I know what I don't want, but I don't know what I want. So they'll probably not give you stakeholders. You have to be able to drive the team or encourage the team to think out of the box and have the lean, agile mindset of actually developing out functionalities, even if they don't have the full requirements. We'll talk about that. All right. Another thing we talk about stakeholders is I can put things into the sprint at any given time. All right. I can put things into the sprint at any given time. So, it's funny because stakeholders tell us that all the time. They think they own the business, and which they do, to be honest, but they can't also just put things into the sprint, because what happens is there will be a scope creep. Ladies and gentlemen, a scope creep happens when things are added to the sprint that changes the dynamics of the velocity and changes the scope and actually hinders the team from actually meeting the sprint goal. All right, I just needed to pause for like 7 seconds to make sure you guys are following what I'm saying. All right, so scope creep is what happens when things are added to the sprint that changes the sprint goal. It changes the amount of committed work into the sprint. And a lot of things happens when there's scope creep. And that's why there are different methodologies that can help the stakeholders meet their needs. If you are working in a very volatile environment or a very frequently changing environment where the requirements keep changing, or where there's a continuous need to keep adding work into the sprint, then there's a different methodology that might be better. You might start to have the conversation of maybe we can do Kanban, and maybe there's a way we can use the right framework. Maybe sprinting is not the right framework for it. Because I remember a time in 2019, I was at Fidelity Investment, ladies and gentlemen, and we had this engagement with this data migration team, and we had the stakeholders that were like, they were managers in the team. And what they would do at every given time is to, regardless of where we are in the sprint, they'll pull out like 5 stories from the sprint and just say, hey, work on these new sets of stories, regardless of where we were. We will absorb, like, for example, 15 stories, 15 user stories into the sprint, and they'll put like 5 days into the sprint, they'll put like 7 stories out and tell them, oh, we need to work on these new 7 stories. So the team never had a direction as to what we needed to do. I had to go. This is me putting myself in the box of a change agent. I had to go and get into that conversation of, hey, what can we do differently? If this is the way the requirements are going to keep coming, we have a very volatile, high changing requirements that keep coming, our priority, for the lack of better term. Maybe we can work with Kanban and then put together some work in progress limits in such a way that when the developers pull in like 5 or 4 tickets or so, whatever it looks like, and you change whatever is on the to-do or open column, we can be proactive enough to say, after this 5, which will probably round up the next 2 or 3 days, we'll be able to grab the next tickets on the queue. So it just makes us a little bit faster instead of always going to the backlog and pulling things into the sprint, which changes the velocity, changes the dynamics of the team. A lot of developers are starting to work on this. They're like 70% in on the work. The work is pulled out for a more high priority work. It's very important that you keep stakeholders' mindset first, but you also need to remember that one of the key things you do is also to shield the developers from distractions and anything that could hinder them from getting the work done. And sometimes the work could hinder the work from being done. I'll try to say it again. Sometimes the work, the real work, can hinder the work from being done. All right. So these are some of the things the stakeholders say, what they say. All right. Slide to the next one. All right, we're going to look at what functional managers and people leads say. All right. Functional managers. Functional managers are people that the developers kind of report to for the most part. And people leads are people who have reports that reports to them. I know that's tautology. But yes, people leads are people who have reports. All right. They say that everyone reports to them. That's one of the things they say. Everyone reports to me. Everyone. So I don't care. I don't care what you're saying. Everyone reports to me. Everybody reports to me, which is not true, not all the time. Because everyone reports to them, they feel they can actually influence the sprint. They feel they can actually influence the capacity. They're supposed to be in charge of the resources in the team, and I do not like calling developers resources, but they're supposed to be in charge of the people that actually do the work. They're actually not supposed to be a blocker themselves, excuse me. Actually not supposed to be a blocker themselves to the team, all right? Another thing they like to say is that I need to see all the team's metrics, including the retrospective summaries. Now, don't get me wrong. The people leads and the functional managers, they could see some of the metrics. In all my engagements across my years of service as a Scrum Master and as an Agile coach, I've seen functional managers I've seen metrics that should be given to the functional managers. I've seen metrics that should be given to the people leads, but not all the metrics. There's a clear line of difference. As a Scrum Master, someone on the team, you should be able to create the disconnect. You should be able to create the difference between the kind of metrics that is open to people outside the team versus the kind of metrics that is open to people in the team. Retrospective summaries, for example, it's an internal team's metrics. You're not supposed to share the retrospective with anyone that is outside the team. Anyone, I'm saying it, anyone. You're not supposed to share. There's some metrics that stays with the team and some other metrics that you can share. I don't want to know whether it's the people lead, whether it's the functional manager. You cannot share, for example, the one I have on my slide. There's some other metrics. Some of them are in contention. I'm not going to put it, I didn't put them on my slide because I didn't want to create a debate here. But one of those that is almost as clear like the day and the night is the retrospective summaries. You cannot share the retrospective summary with anyone who is not a core team member on the team. Another anomaly that we see is that, oh, they want to attend all the team's meetings, the daily stand-up, the retrospective, the planning, the replenishment meeting in Kanban, all the meetings they have, the engineering meeting, the stabilization meeting in XP. They want to attend all the meetings. You cannot, sir. You cannot, man. You cannot attend. These are some of the anomalies. We want to protect the team. You want to shield the team. You want to ensure the team has it's intact to deliver value. All right. So these are some of the anomalies that we get from the functional managers and the people lead. We're going to look at what the program managers. A lot of us are working in scaled environments now, where we're actually moving up, going a little bit up from a team's level now to program levels, and we get to see some of the anomalies. Some of the program managers even tell us to. So some of us are practicing different scaling frameworks here in our different organizations, or we have experience with it. You get to hear some things that the program managers say, and you'd be like, there's an opportunity for us to change the way our mindsets are. They say things like, oh, feature refinement should be done at the team's level. Feature refinement should be done at the team's level. Ladies and gentlemen, this is real. I'm in a group of folks that we talk a lot about community best practices and how we can improve the whole agility throughput end-to-end concepts. And this is one of the topics that bothers me a lot. Feature refinement is very critical. It should be done on a very high level before it's actually broken down to the team's level. It is a no-no if you ask the team to actually do refinement on a team level. They should be cascaded down from the program level, and the refinement should be done there. That's improving practices. Should be done in a high level before it's actually cascaded down to the team's level. So that's an anomaly, right? Well, yes, sometimes they say, oh, I don't have to help prioritize any epic or features for the team. That's another thing that we get to hear from program managers. Oh, I don't have to help. The team should go ahead and prioritize the epic and features for the team. A program manager is a useful ally in prioritizing epics and features in a scaled environment. Is a very useful ally. As a matter of fact, the program manager should be the person prioritizing the epic and features for all the teams. So these are some of the things what they say, and then in the coming slides, we're going to look at some of the things, potential things that you could say to them, and some of the ways to kind of shape your conversation around. All right. We're going to look at portfolio leads. Once again, the reality is that some of us are also working in organizations that are heavy waterfall again too. So they are waterfallish, agile-ish, Agile, a lot of conversation about, or some of us are working in transformational organizations where a couple of years back, there were whole full-scale waterfall, full-scale project management. Now they are all transitioning now to Agile, right? So they're going to see people who have this designation, they call them portfolio leads. It's not an ad, just say, oh, my organization doesn't have a portfolio lead. Correct. The organization may not have a portfolio lead. It doesn't take away the fact that there's some positions they call portfolio lead. So we talk about things like, they say things like, oh, every epic is of equal importance. Every epic is of equal importance. No. That's why you assign rankings. That's why they call something they call rankings to the epic. The team cannot be coerced to believe that every epic is important, because that way we don't know where to put our most value. We don't know exactly what the stakeholders is interested. One of the things we talk about, the potentially shippable product, talk about the things of the most highest value to the stakeholders. How are we able to deliver an epic and know that this is the most highest value to our stakeholders if they're all technically of the same importance? We want to have some ranking system. We want to make sure we're putting our customers first. We want to make sure we're attending to the needs of our stakeholders, and we're giving them, and we're working on the most high priority work at every given time. And one of the anomalies that we get, or one of the things that we hear, is that we're going to scale too fast with multiple teams on a single project. That's wrong in many ways. We want to scale too fast with multiple teams on a single project. Scaling is done systematically. I'm gonna use another word. Scaling is done systematically. You cannot just decide. Every time I talk to Agile transformation leads and I'm chiming in with them, I tell them all the time that, hey, you have to pilot. There's a reason why there's something they call pilot. You have to have pilot teams. You have to have pilot individuals. You need to have advocates before you scale. Before you scale, point blank. You cannot scale any program, cannot scale any value stream. You cannot scale any division just like that. Just bond all the teams together, give them classifications, create release trains or whatever, and then scale. You have to have a pilot, go through your inspect and adapt piece, learn from your mistakes, and then the pilots become the advocate for the organizational wide change or the divisional wide change or the program wide change. But you see portfolio leads, because they want to impress, they come to say, oh, we're going to scale with all these teams on a single project immediately. I believe that's something that we can change. That's something that they say to us, and that's an opportunity for us to make those changes. Another thing portfolio lead does is to try to compare the velocity of different teams. Ladies and gentlemen, two teams are never the same, regardless. Even if they have the same resources on the team, two teams are not the same. The people that make the team are different. The scope of the work is different. The nature of the work is different. The tools could also be different. Two teams can never be the same. It is bad practice in any way, in any form, to try to compare the velocity of multiple teams. Every time you try to compare the velocity of multiple teams, it's a bad practice. It's a bad practice. We see portfolio leads that are trying to do that. Oh, this team is giving me this velocity. Why are you not giving me this velocity? You shouldn't do that. So we're going to learn in a little bit what to say when we have things like that. When someone says, oh, we want to measure the velocity of multiple teams together. That's not a very great practice, all right? All right, so the next category, and which is the last category, is orders. Orders. And the reason why I use orders is, I don't know, I have this funny thing here. I didn't know who again. I had called everyone I thought about that could exist in an organization, in an IT organization, you know? So I had orders there. We see people talking about practices without the principles. I see people talking about the principles without the practices. This is critically important, and I stress it. The principles and the practices go hand in hand. They're immutable. You cannot separate it. I wrote a comment. I wrote a post on LinkedIn some years back, and it was centered about stringing together a bunch of agile teams doesn't necessarily make them agile. You have to have the right principles to change the mindset, and then have the right practices to drive the change. One of my early engagements in 2014 was with Woodforest National Bank. And in Woodforest National Bank, one of the things they were trying to do was to drive the principles without the practices. So they hired all the Scrum Masters, and they just allowed us to go into the teams, and we were excited. We're preaching the gospel of Agile. So we were talking about Agile. We were, really excited and passionate about Agile. And but they lack the practices. They lack the technological framework to drive those principles. For example, we talked about, we could do testing in a different way. Hey, we want to release quickly. We want to ensure that releases, we want to have a proper naming convention for our releases. But they didn't have the required releases documentations to actually even release at all, to even release on time. The pipelines were not all bad. There was really nothing to help encourage the deliveries and the releases that we were preaching. The teams were all preaching. The Scrum Masters were preaching with the teams.
Excuse me.
Please.
Sorry to disturb you. Can you please give some examples of the practices? What do you mean by practices? How those practices, if followed properly, they can, improvise or lead the changes effectively in an organization?
Yeah, thank you, Atul. So yes, and I'm glad you asked that. I'm really glad you asked that. So there's some practices, like I was kind of referencing some of those examples right now. For example, releases, right? When you Scrum Masters are talking about, hey, this is how we want to release. Hey, let's come up with a naming convention, and let's put all your bundle up all your epics and your stories, assign them to this release, and then that's basic, right? That's good practices. That's like teaching the principles on how to show a start date and end date for our releases. But if you don't have the continuous pipeline, if you don't have the technological framework from an organizational standpoint to drive to those releases, you cannot even release. For example, that's just one of the environment. Testing environment. Hey, if your definition of done as a Scrum Master principles, you're telling the team, hey, we need to create a definition of done. We need to create a definition of ready. And these are some of the things that we want. We want to ensure that we have acceptance criteria. We want to ensure we do peer programming, for example. We want to ensure we do some of all these great technical capabilities on this project, on this team. But then the organization itself don't even have the practices that supports the principles. Hey, they don't even have an environment for testing, for example, or the testing environment is outsourced to a third-party firm or to an organization to help with the testing. How do you even help the team when you, as Scrum Master, you're preaching, hey, let's have, definition of done. Let's have multiple environments. Let's have on-the-spot testing, maybe functional testing, maybe regressional testing, and then maybe the testing is even sourced out to another third-party firm to do the testing. So that's a clear example of we Scrum Masters sometimes trying to drive the principles and the underlying practices are missing. And sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, it could even be the other way. Sometimes the practices are there, but then we don't have the people to drive the principles. And you know what? Some of the principles is because when they say something to us, we don't have the right words to say back. So we try to drive the changes, and our changes, sometimes we're too timid to even be a change agent. So the principle space is missing. So the practices could be there and the principles is out of the way. Sometimes it's the principle that is there. We're preaching Agile, we're telling them about the mindset, how we need to change, the minimum viable product, for example. This is how we need to work. We need to work, even if we don't have the full requirements, we're going to potentially work on something that represents value to our stakeholders, functionality that represents value to our stakeholders. But if you're preaching all that and the practices is missing, there's already an appreciable disconnect already there somewhere. So the whole concept is sometimes we hear people tell us things and there's no supporting. If they say, oh, we want to drive the practices, but we don't have the principles. Oh, we want to drive the principles and we don't have the practices. So those are some of the things they say to us. The whole concept of this webinar is for us to put ourselves in a position to begin to think about the things that we hear on our job, the things that some of the resources, some of the people tell us in our quest to drive organizational agility. What are some of the things they say to us? And in the comment slides, we're going to go through some of the things that we could say to that. Atu, I don't know whether, did I try to kind of answer your question? No, yes.
Yeah, just want to know one thing. I believe you are talking about the agile principles, right? I mean, three pillars and 5 Scrum values, or anything else?
Correct. So it's part of it. It's part of it. But so this webinar is going to be from a higher level of just what they say to us. And yes, you're correct. Those are some of the principles we're talking about. And it doesn't matter what the principle are. There are too many principles: the agile mindset, the values, like you mentioned there, and the rest of it. Any of them. I'm trying to be very high level now because I know some of us work with XP teams, some of us work with Kanban teams. Some of us work with Scrum. It doesn't matter. Whatever principles you're trying to change, you will find people that will come to us and talk about the practices without the principles. Or sometimes they talk about the principles without the practices. There must be a synergy of both of them for organizational agility to succeed in every aspect, in deliveries, in configuration, in development, in product, everything. They have to be a synergy of the agile principles and the agile practices. All right. Thank you so much too. All right. So, sometimes what others sometimes say is that the project manager becomes the scrum master. Now I have no problem with project managers becoming scrum masters because I was a project manager before I became a scrum master. The problem is the last 3 words, which is without adequate training. Because in my experience, what happens is every time project managers become scrum masters, without the training, they are not able to imbibe the agile principles and they're not able to live the agile mindset to the fullest. Because there's a set about trainings that project managers get that is a little bit technically different from the scrum masters. That's why they have to be that marriage. That's why there has to be that synergy between the project managers understanding the principles of Scrum before they actually transition to become Scrum masters. So sometimes you hear HR saying, oh, the project manager, just move, your project has been changed or transformed to an agile project, become the Scrum master. One of the things you should say if you're an agile coach, one of the things you should say if you're trying to drive organizational agility is, hey, we need to go for training. They need to go for training. They need to be able to become Scrum masters. And the only way they can really, really become Scrum masters, being a servant leader, taking a back step and allowing the team take the shine and allowing the team be creative and innovative, is to undergo those training for a Scrum Master, just learn before they actually just transition directly to the job. So we hear this kind of thing on the job. We hear that's an anomaly that happens in Agile transformational teams. Project managers just becoming Scrum Masters. One of my good friends is a HR recruiter, and the next one I'm going to talk about is another of those things, anomalies that we hear what they say. Let's hire a technical Scrum Master. Listen, guys. I'm looking for the right way to say this. So a technical Scrum Master is not going to help your project in any way better than a non-technical Scrum Master. Because one of the things we want to do in Scrum is to create the line of difference between development and Scrum. That's why in the 3 roles that we have in Scrum, for example, I'm going to keep using Scrum. Scrum is fairly bigger than Kanban and the rest, is we have the development team, you have the product owner, and the Scrum Master. There's a reason why there are 3 classification or categorization in those 3 roles. Because they want to separate development from Scrum, from someone who drives the framework. So one of the reasons why we hear organizations talking about technical Scrum Masters is because they want Scrum Masters who have an understanding of the project. They want Scrum Masters who have an understanding of the layers of codes, of the tools they're using, which is awesome. But there's really no reason in every sense for an organization to decide that this is going to be the Scrum Master they're going to hire. It's going to be a technical Scrum Master in many ways. There's really no reason for that. There's really no reason for why they should hire a Scrum Master and say that this is going to be the Scrum Master, a technical Scrum Master. I strongly think that is one of the anomalies that we see all the time, hiring a technical Scrum Master. Another thing they say is that, oh, we want a Scrum Master who can best interpret the code. Or another thing they say is that, oh, they want a Scrum Master who can actually go into the codes and actually write some codes or write some queries for the codes. That is you don't want, it's not improving, it's not a leading practice for any Scrum Master to write any layer of code for the development team. You will always want to create that checks and balances within the Scrum enforcer or the Scrum Master and the development team. All right, another thing is that another thing when they say what they say is development team reporting to the product owner. Now, you also want to create that line of distinction between the development team and the product owner as well. You always want to make sure that the development team do not report to the product owner. You want to make sure the development team has their own dotted line. I'll tell you reasons, ladies and gentlemen. One of the reasons is because when you have the product owner as the manager of the development team, there's a tendency for the development team the tendency for first of all, the product owner to want to assign duties to the development team people because they are his reports or they are her reports. But that's not the way it works. You must be able to create that checks and balances between the development team and the product owner. It's best practices that the product owner reports to someone in product or reports to someone else, and the development team members report into maybe a development leader or a people lead or some functional manager different, the line manager or something different. That creates that checks and balances within the team. So these are some of the anomalies we hear, what they say to us, all right? So mind you, when I categorize it as others, I went across everywhere, HR and everything. These are some of the things we hear from people who are not in an agile space, who are not in an agile role like that, all right? So some of the things they say to us, totally different from the things that we should say to them. Now, I also want to say this as I kind of move on, that the list is not endless. There are too many other things that happens. There are too many other things that they say to us or that people say to us. I can't capture them all in slides. This is my best bet of just trying my best in capturing out what they say. All right, the next and the flip side of it is what you say in Agile delivery. All right, what you say in Agile delivery. All right, one of the first things I have there, I have some quotable quotes there, and I have, what if everything you say matter? Just think about it for a hot second. And I want all of us to think over these quotes for 5 seconds. Each of them, I'm going to read them and just take 5 seconds to like pause over them And that's going to be like our breather as we kind of flip up. And I don't know my time, but I'm going to wrap up this in the next 20 minutes or so. All right. What if everything you said really, really mattered? Think about this, guys. What if everything you said, you didn't have a pushback? You didn't have a blocker. You didn't have a restriction. Hey, let's develop a minimum viable product. Yes, sir. Hey, we're going to meet for our sprint planning. Yes. Hey, this is our retrospective. We're going to put together things that went well, things that didn't go well, and I'll take away from this sprint. Good. What if everything you said really mattered? All right, anonymous. Also, too, it's not also what you say, it's how you say it. So, well, as we kind of move on with this webinar now, you're going to see that it's not also what you say, it's also how you say it. All right. So, and I know we're talking about, what you say. It's also not just what you say back, it's how you say it. How passionate are you saying it? How confident are you saying? How intentional are you also saying it? Words are powerful, but what's more powerful is modeling. So you can say everything you want to say, but what is more critical is how you model those behaviors. I was talking to my product owner and one of the new Scrum Masters that was taking over one of my teams today, and I was doing some handover to the new Scrum Master, and I said, hey, there's an opportunity for the team to improve them writing their stories and some of their tasks. And I told them that we're creating a task template that they could use, but I didn't get to finish it before I was being moved away from that team. And I told the Scrum Master that, hey, one of the things you will face in this team is that you will not only have to say something, you will have to model the behavior. You will not only have to say, they're powerful, but sometimes you have to show, you have to demonstrate it. You have to go into the description and change the description. You have to go into an acceptance criteria and change the acceptance criteria. You have to go into meetings and effect changes in those meetings intentionally. And the last thing I want us to think about is saying something one time is not enough sometimes. It could take repetition to drive consistency. So sometimes we all think that, and I showed a video on this recently on my LinkedIn, a very short video. I was kind of introducing this whole idea because I run Agile in 60 seconds on LinkedIn, and it's my passion. It's something I love to do. So I talked about this. Sometimes we think that when we have said something one time is enough. You may have to say 2, 3, 5, 10 times to drive changes. Two people are not the same. You have to understand it. Sometimes it's the repetition that drives consistency. Hey, I want us to improve the way we're writing our user stories. I want us to improve the way we're calculating our capacity. I want us to, the way we're doing our lead time and our cycle time, there's an opportunity for us to improve. You have to say it today, probably say it tomorrow, maybe say it the next day, maybe the next day again, maybe a couple of more times before the changes begin to trickle in. All right, so we're going to flip it again and go over from the developer back to the others again and see some of the things you could say to them. All right, what you should say to a developer. Actually, be mindful of their time. Remember that one of the things they say to us is, oh, I don't have time. You really should be mindful of the time, because you know what? They don't have time. They really don't have time. They're maxed out with work. They spend countless hours developing software that the business uses. Be mindful of their time. When you can move meetings, go ahead and move meetings. When you can shift meetings, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and do it. Also, cross-team communication breeds cohesion. Understand that. So when they tell you that, oh, why do I have to talk to my fellow developer? Tell them that you want to breed the cohesion as a unit. But mind you, pay attention. If the organization is promoting the specialist mode as against the generalist mode, you don't have to bother yourself about developers leaning upon the next developer for work. So one broomstick is easily broken, but the three-fold cord is not. United we stand, divided we fall. These are some of the things you want to share with the team, right? We want to share that we can easily stand the test of time as a development team when we're united. We want to drive this collaboration. We also want to help one another reach our personal team and collective goals, all right? We want to help ourselves reach our personal goals. The insight consultant wants the data engineer to reach his goal. The data engineer has a goal to become the principal data engineer. He needs the database to help him reach that goal. The database wants to become a lead database. Probably needs the architect to be able to do that. So everyone is accountable one another to reach their personal, team, and collective goals. So this is some of the things you say. And it's funny because when I was creating this article, it's funny because the article says what they say versus what you say. It sounds like if it's some magical thing you're supposed to say. It's really not magical. And you get to see it as we go over the slide, that it's just basic human touch to Scrum is what we're talking about. Gunter is one of my favorite persons in Agile. He talks about humanizing the work environment. That's really what we should be thinking about as Agilists. That's really what we should be paying attention to. How can we put a human touch in Agile development? We're going to look at what you say to a product owner. Talk about the methodology and the framework. Sometimes the product owner, they do not know when they say example that, oh, I can run all the ceremonies, I can assign the work. They don't know about the methodology. They don't know at the framework. And I'm leaving it very high level because the framework you are using might be different from the framework I'm using. So whoever is your product owner, talk about the framework with them. Don't leave it to chance. When you take up a new engagement or periodically set up time with your product owner and just talk about the framework and the methodology. It helps a lot when you have intentional conversation. So folks that attend my space always hear me talk about intentionality. You have to be intentional. You don't leave anything to chance. You don't say, oh, they know. They don't know till you tell them, till you speak about it, till you have informal conversations around it. Talk about the clear lines of distinctions and the similarities between the Scrum Master and the product owner, because believe you me or not, there are too many similarities between the role of the product owner and that of the Scrum Master. A lady walked up to me the other day and said, oh, my product owner runs the backlog grouping and the sprint planning. I run the review and the retrospective and the daily stand-up. I said, you're good. You're good. Because there's a dotted line between the product owner and the Scrum Master. There's too many cross-change and cross-pattern that goes on between both of those. All right. So just have those intentional conversations about the distinctions. Hey, I don't want to step on your toe. All right. I took up an engagement in Blue Cross in 2019, and one of my conversations I had with them was I said, hey, I don't want to step on your toe. I was talking to one of my product owners. I said, hey, I don't want to step on your toe. You've been running these ceremonies and you're doing some of the things the Scrum Master should do, but I want to make sure that I'm a value add to you. So can we have an open conversation about where you want me to play? What are some of the things, what are some of those gaps you want me to fill? Identified gaps. What are some of those things that you want me to do? And that can help us reach our collective goals, help us push the team to a greater status from where we are. That's talking about the lines of distinctions and the lines of similarities. Another thing is that you need to talk about building accountability. It's crucial in allowing developers pick issues on themselves. So when the product owner says, oh, I want to assign, or I could assign issues to the developer, you're going to tell him that it does not build accountability if you assign them. You want the developers to own the stories. They own the story right from them accepting. That's why it's called committed. The developers are committing to the work. If you assign it to them, they are no longer committed to the work, to be honest. If I was a developer and someone assigned the work to me, I can claim I'm not committed to it because I didn't agree to it. All right. So you want to build accountability by telling them that, hey, product owner, I know you want to assign them, but let's drive accountability with this thing. Let them pick up issues themselves and let's watch it. And let's also have a vote of confidence. A lot of people no longer do vote of confidence. A vote of confidence is crucially important in helping developers build accountability. I'm kind of going through this in a quick now. The stakeholders, be mindful of the time as well. Stakeholders own the business, ladies and gentlemen. They do own the business. Be mindful of the time. Move your reviews as much as you can. Don't be stuck up. Oh, they cannot come for my review. That's it. We don't have anything to demo again to them. Ask them, hey, when is a good time to schedule a review? Build smaller reviews, have frequent engagement and constant collaboration with the stakeholders, and then you can also review to them. You don't have to get stuck on, oh, it's every other Wednesday is our sprint review, and that's when we'll demo the product. If the developers are fine in having more frequent short circuit meeting or cycle meeting with the stakeholders, go ahead and have those with them as well. Ability to build prototypes, which allows you to make informed decisions from it. So tell the stakeholders that, hey, we do have the abilities to build prototypes. Your development team must have the ability to build prototypes. So when they say that, oh, I don't know what I want, oh, but I know what I don't know what I want, tell them that you will go ahead, the team will go ahead and build prototypes for them to react to it. All right. So I remember we're working on an intake process. Actually, we're working on it's called the call center demand team, call center demand management system. And essentially, they just needed something to automate the process they were currently working, and the process was dragging. I think it was like a 5 hours lag for them to pull some certain kind of data from a source. And they asked us to kind of speed up the process. One of the easiest thing to do was just to put some plugs on Excel, and that would enable them pull those data from it. But the more permanent role will also build out build out something from Alteryx, and that will enable them just automate the whole process, like they're able to retrieve those data fast. What we did, the stakeholders asked us to just put up the plugins on Excel, and that will be all. But we did that, but we also built out, one thing I encouraged the development team was to put out a spike and said, can we research on what it takes for us to build out this process on Alteryx that will totally eradicate this problem for our stakeholders? And then we put out the spike, and the next sprint, we built out a prototype. And then when we're demoing the Excel with the plugin on it, we demoed the prototype, and our stakeholders were blown out. They were like, my goodness, we have never seen this before. So we allowed, essentially what we did there was to build out a prototype and allowed our stakeholders to be creative. I talk about Scrum teams being order takers. We have to step out from being order takers, waiting for our stakeholders to give us requirement to do the right thing. We should be able to get ahead of the stakeholders and build our prototypes for them to react with. That is when we become insightful. That's when we become creative. That's when Scrum teams become innovative. We must also have the ability to be flexible, to have a crash sprint planning, to absorb prioritized user stories. So I know we talked about having the right framework. Sometimes when you have the right framework, you also have to have the ability to be flexible. Flexibility is crucial in Agile, ladies and gentlemen. It is super crucial in Agile to be flexible, to understand that stakeholders may come to you during the sprint and give you a more high priority work. Recently, we had a reorganization in my company, and one of the many acts from our new CEO was to do some kind of data modeling. And we had really fantastic working on a project, and we're many months on almost completion. But we had to kind of temporarily put the work on hold and focus on what is more important, handed down to us from the CEO, because it was crucial in the reorganization that's going on with the company. So that is us being flexible. That is us putting side by side and asking ourselves, what is the highest value to our stakeholders? What is that one thing that our stakeholders want to see that makes sense to them? Kernel prioritization is great. Whether short job first is great. But one thing I like to ask our product owners to say is, what is that one thing that will create a delightsome experience for the customer, the business, the stakeholders? When you identify that, go for it. Keep an eye on sprint disruption, all right, which can derail the team from reaching the committed sprint goal. So you need to tell them actually sometimes that, hey, we're going to be flexible and have a crash sprint planning to absorb prioritized work, but we also want to be mindful of sprint disruption. I talk about intentionality because you have to tell them. You have to tell them that, hey, if you keep bringing work into the sprint and it derails us, we may not be able to meet the committed sprint goals again because our minds are blown out into many places. We may not have the ability to come together and deliver work again. So just make sure you have those kind of conversations with your stakeholders as well. Mind you, it is also not what you say, but how you say it. All right, what you say to people leads and functional managers. So, they could observe predictability of delivery from a higher level than measuring velocity of teams. All right. We talk about people leads and functional managers trying to measure velocity of teams or comparing velocity of multiple teams. They don't have to do that. If they are looking for predictability of delivery or they want to see how frequent deliveries are, they could scale it up and look at it from a higher level. Look at it from, what are the committed versus completed, or look at the cumulative flow diagram. If it's a Kanban team or maybe a sprint report that doesn't show too many information, just shows the committed stories pulled out of the sprint and stories not completed, they can observe predictability from those. Or they could look at the sprint review report and look at the kind of work, the issues, the tasks that you guys are demoing to your stakeholders, rather than measuring the velocity of comparable teams. All right. So you have those kind of conversations, intentional conversations with them, and then they begin to understand. All right. Another thing they could do is to measure Agile teams' health maturity, and they could use that to close identified gaps, right? So as a team's health assessment, that too many teams' health assessment are everywhere. They could use that to measure the team's health. They could ask questions of pertinent questions of, hey, how are we with stories? There's a lot of questions that make up the team's health maturity. They could ask to close the identified gaps rather than trying to be in meeting. Remember, we're trying to counter the things they say. The people say, oh, they want to be in your meetings. They want to be in your daily stand-up. They want to be in your review, your planning, your retrospective, your grooming, your refinement, everything. They could measure, you could give them a copy of the team's health maturity, and they could use that to have a sense of where the team is at, rather than attending those meetings and creating an imbalance within the people in your team. All right, and Kelvin, I'll come to your question real. I think it's very important, so maybe I can take it real quick before I continue, or maybe I'll just come back to it at some point. All right, but Kelvin, I want to acknowledge I did see your question, so I'll come back to that at some point. All right, what you say to program and portfolio leads. All right, there's a lot of things they could do rather than trying to unbalance the team, right? They could conduct trainings and education of Agile communities of best practices within your organization. So your Agile Center of Excellencies, your Agile Lean meetings, and everything that you guys have representing Agile in your organization, your program and portfolio leads, they could train, they could drive those conversations within those spaces, those open spaces in terms of the best practices and Agile leading practices, rather than diving into the nitty-gritty of the makeup of the individual teams. They could also assist set up Agile Center of Excellence, or just the participants in Agile Centers of Excellences and Lean coffee sessions. Another thing they could do is to bridge knowledge gaps between the resources. So the people that make up the team, they could help bridge knowledge gap. You have like some developers that just know like old codes like R and Python and C and SQL and maybe C++, C# or something. They could bridge those gaps by telling them, let them work on Java, let them work on Python, depending on what the scope and the tool needed for the project. But they could bridge all this knowledge gap, recommend trainings to the resources and the reports that are under them to go for to bridge those knowledge gaps. Industry best practices, they could also bring to the resources and the teams and help them upskill some of their knowledge that they have, all right? They could also drive conversations of, are we using the right tools and technology that support organizational deliveries, all right? It's very possible that the team is actually developing and actually building that good software, if you're a software company, or dashboards or reports, whatever you guys are doing, but you are also not using the right tools. You are not sustainable. You guys are not competing with your competitors or being an active competitor with your competition and competitors by using the right tools and technologies. Those are where we want the functional managers, people leads, program and portfolio leads to play. So start those conversations with them, and you'll be shocked to see where they will take the conversation to. All right. So these numbers are not very relevant to this training now. So I'll just skip through them. So once again, we've got to the end of this training. I want to thank you guys for listening in. You can find me on LinkedIn, and that's me there. That's my meetup page where you could join us in our bi-weekly meetup. I want to say a very big thank you to people who made this a success. Medium.com, Onyinye Wegbe. Check him out. His name is Dela Baba, Unique Agility and Scrum Masters of African Descent. And that's the end. Thank you. Open for questions.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, my name is Ayo. This calling from Texas. I've always seen most often than not that all the stakeholders and senior executives they always liking um velocity, just like you said, to productivity. As we all know, we know velocity is not equals to productivity. And the only reason why I think they do that is because of the story points that's been assigned to some of these stories that development teams are working on. So I begin to think of an idea. I read an article sometimes. Instead of now assigning points to some of these stories, why can't the development team start using something like arbitrary figures like sizes of animals, whereby depending on the task of the story point they're working on, maybe you want to assign an elephant, a lion, a dog, a cat in terms of sizes. So that way they won't confuse velocity to productivity.
I agree with you, Ayodele, in many ways. It's one of those things that we talk about all the time, how stakeholders need to just kind of create that line of difference between velocity and productivity of a team. Um, it, it, so velocity is one of those things, personally, I think that doesn't necessarily mean that a team is productive. Velocity shows the stability of pattern, in my opinion. It shows what the team is capable of doing in a sprint. It necessarily doesn't mean the team is producing the highest valued product to the stakeholders. That's why it's critically important to create that line of distinction between what the velocity of a team is and what they're producing out. That's why one of my visions for product manager, program managers, and just stakeholders is take a look at the bigger picture. Take a look at what are those high value priorities now? What are we doing to actually bridge those gaps rather than focusing on what the team is committing to? Take it, because if you think about it at your daily, velocity is all about the committed work that is going over a number of sprints. So what is the average pattern of the work technically we can complete, or we can commit and complete over a set of sprints? It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the most high valued work that our stakeholders. So I agree with you in many ways. The story points, Fibonacci scale, and the rest of the things that we're using, they are leading practices. Some of those things are really not Scrum. So you could use t-shirt sizing. You could. I'm a firm believer of you could use anything that your team understands as baselines for your team. Just make sure that you're not comparing. Just make sure that the message out there is to make sure that two teams are not the same, and the value that the two teams produce are also not the same. So we need to just understand that, especially when you try to compare two teams together.
All right, thank you.
And then,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You please go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to read Kelvin's question. If a stakeholder wants to change the sprint goal in the middle of the sprint, do you tell them that they have to wait until the sprint is over, or do you tell the team that they need to work on a new goal in the middle of the sprint? All right. So great question you asked, Kelvin. You can tell them in the middle of the sprint that, hey, listen, it depends on the priority that's assigned to the work that is being added to the sprint. I'm gonna tell you what I do as one of the practices I do. First of all, when you go into your sprint, you create a buffer. You create a buffer in your team for exigencies and for high priority work, and just give a buffer just in case the other things that come into your sprint. So you could go in at 80% of the capacity, you could go in at 75%, depending on the risk tolerance of your team, right? You go in and create that buffer with your team. But when they change the goal of the sprint in the middle of the sprint, technically what that means is that the 75% that you guys are working on, they want to change because that's the goal. The goal is 75%. If you change the goal of the sprint, they have to wait. You have to let them know that the sprint goal has changed. And the team has to agree to see whether they can complete the work or not. Because the team agreed to work on 75% of their capacity and they agreed on the stories that made up the 75%. If you bring up a new set of work mid-sprint, the team may or may not commit to completing the work during that sprint. So I think it's all about having that open conversation of, hey, if this is what is the most highest value to you, we will pay attention to it, we will do it. We may or may not be able to complete this work before the sprint ends. We might have a different goal for our sprint and the timeline of completion might change. Kelvin, does that kind of answer your question? Yes. All right. Atu, did you want to speak?
Yeah. So if the one of the challenge that I face as a Scrum Master frequently, I mean, due to work pressure or the workload, the entire development team says like, okay, for every sprint they say to me like, okay, we don't have time for product backlog refinement session. We don't have time for retrospective. So frequently for every sprint. So how to go about it?
Yeah, so you just asked something that's very dear to me. So yeah, we just talked about it. I don't have time. It's a recurring theme with Agile, with development teams, just everyone. I don't have time. They don't have time for anything. One of the things I tried to say when I was talking about it is that you really have to be mindful of the time, to be honest. Too. They are super people that do super work, and the work is the value to the organization. So yes, you have to be mindful of the time, but at the same time, you have to talk about the value add of those meetings. It's critically important that we are all intentionally talking about the value add of those meetings. For example, the daily stand-up is the team communication. We want to see the collaboration among them. What about the backlog refinement? The backlog refinement is all about discovery of the work. We want to make sure that, hey, the work is while having full discovery on the work. All the gaps, we want to identify all the risks and the dependencies assigned to every issue on the backlog or the stories that we're grooming. That's the essence. So if they don't understand what we're doing, then they think it's a waste of time. What is the sprint planning? We want to have our committed goals for this sprint. We want to have a sprint goal. What is that direction? Where are we headed to in this 2-week sprint? In this 3-week sprint, in this 1-month sprint, in this whatever, even if it's a Kanban thing, where is our direction at? So you want to make sure you're communicating. Retrospective, inspect, and adapt. We want to learn from our mistakes. We want to learn and see how we can get better. I always think that is when we do not have those conversations and communications, intentional conversations with the development team, we keep the door open for interpretation. And they're like, oh, I don't have time. No, I don't want to come to your meeting. But at one of my engagements I had to talk about the essence of the meeting every time I started the meeting. If I'm getting this right, 2017, this was SunTrust. I had to talk about, if you get into a backlog refinement, I take like 2 minutes to talk about the refinement. Remember, I'm trying to drive consistency. At the back of my head, I know it's repetition that drives consistency. So the refinement, I talk about it. The next 2 weeks refinement, I talk about it. The retrospective, I talk about it. I talk about why we're doing retrospective. I don't just start my meeting with an icebreaker or just with anything. I talk about the benefit of it. So it keeps sticking in their mind for them to know why we're even coming together to have those meetings. Does that help, Atu?
Yes, thank you. Just one more query. So in every Scrum ceremony, you first take the 2 minutes of every ceremony for every to tell them the benefits, and then you proceed further.
Yes, I did that. I did that in 2017 for one of my teams. Yes, I knew that they needed that reinforcement, that repetition. So yes, I did that. I did that for like a year, every meeting.
Oh. And it changed their mindset, and then they agreed with such kind of practice.
Yes, because repetition drives consistency. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
You're welcome. And I think we do have a question from, must you have a retro? This is from Selling. Must you have a retro with the Kanban team? Yes, I think so. I know so. You should have a retro with anybody. You should have a retro even if you're in a waterfall team. You should have a retrospective. Retrospective allows the team understand how to improve. If you understand the meaning of retrospective, then you see that it's critically impossible even for your personal life. You need to take a step back from the hustles and the bustles of your life to have a retrospective. I think everyone deserves a retrospective at any point in time. I have my retrospective of my life every month. I stop by to just ask myself what I've done through the month and what I can do the next month. So yes, to answer your question, correct. I think retrospective for a Kanban thing, the hard part of it selling is identifying the cadence because there's really no cadence in a Kanban thing. But yes, you mentally come up with those cadence and just tell them that, hey, next week we're going to have our retrospective and we're going to talk about it. Does that answer your question, Celine?
Yes, thank you.
You're most welcome. Am I missing out any question again? Kind of begin to wind down.
Yeah, does anybody else have any questions? And great questions, everyone. This has been a really, really informative session.
Yeah, one more question over here. The engagement was entirely new, and the product owner, that product owner asked our team, regarding like, okay, by which date your team will be able to deliver those features. So she was asking us for a plan for the upcoming 6 months. Without having a velocity that is past data, or without having the team performance data like a velocity, just by using a gut feeling or the guesswork. So, and that she push on us. So how to go about it in such case? Like,
yeah, who was asking again, Atul?
Sorry?
Who was asking you for that?
Product owner, yeah.
Product owner, got you. All right, so yes. So that there's the tangible and the numeric values, which is like the metrics and the velocity that we use. There's also the intangible thing. That's why it's very great for a new engagement, Atul, to utilize your toolkit, and encourage all Scrum Masters on this call. Don't say, oh, I'm not an Agile coach, so I'm not going to have my toolkit. Ladies and gentlemen, have your toolkit. So one of your toolkits you should have is your Agile Team's Health Assessment. For every new engagement, I tell my group all the time, for every new engagement, you cannot just wait. Gone are the days where you start an engagement and you just wait. You just wait for to identify gaps. One quick way to bridge your knowledge and identify those gaps in the team is by allowing them fill an Agile Team's Health Assessment. When they fill up the assessment, when you start a new engagement, you can correlate those information and then you can craft out an action plan for them in the first 1, 2, 3 weeks. Instead of you waiting for like 1 month and then start to identify the gaps, in 3 weeks, you have set the ball in motion and you're already beginning to see effects of your changes with them. So yes, if someone is asking you without the velocity that, hey, what do you think is your feel? I'll say you rely on the non-numeric things. Talk about how the feel of the team is. Talk about how comfortable do they feel working for this team? What's their knowledge level of the products, what's their knowledge level of the tools that they have, they're currently working on? What's the knowledge level of the organization? Those are some of those non-numeric things that you can use to get a sense of where the team is at without having a velocity. Technically, you won't have a velocity till a couple of sprints. They shouldn't technically be asking you for any kind of metrics when you start an engagement, but if someone asks you, either you rely, I never rely upon the velocity of any previous Scrum Master. I've heard that some Scrum Masters do rely on the velocity of the previous Scrum Master. I do not rely on it, but if you want to rely on it, that's also good. If there's an existing velocity and capacity, you can do that. I don't do that. I also don't recommend it. It's just like an auditor going to audit a new organization and 100% relies upon the audit finding from a previous audit. No auditor would do that. They could take some bits of information, but they will still conduct their audit. So you could send the team's health assessment, and I am free to share my team's health assessment with anyone who is interested. But there are too many team's health assessment out there. Look for the one that kind of addresses what you're looking for. Send it out when you have a new engagement, correct your information, and that will set you on your way.
Yeah, but how should I communicate this fact to the product owner that I need, as a Scrum Master, I need some time, maybe 2 sprints or 3 sprints to assess my team. So how should I, and after 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we can begin or start the project. So how should I ask to product owner that, okay, I want a time to assess my team?
Yeah, I think the only way to ask it is to ask it, to be honest. For me, that's the only way. You tell the product owner, hey, we just started the work and we're still getting our capacity per sprint, every sprint. So we certainly do not have a velocity now for this team because it's a new team and I'm trying to get our capacity per sprint. And so we don't have a velocity. What I can provide for you, though, is a non-numeric team's health assessment, as gut feelings of where the team is at, and I can give them a team's health assessment to show the identified areas where I think potentially we can help this team at. But if you are essentially looking for a velocity, you have to wait till 3 sprints, you have to wait till 5 sprints, depending on what you're using as your yardstick as a baseline, but you have to wait so we can get a velocity. I think the missing part is you asking, is you saying it. So I think they would take it when you say it. A lot of time we just don't say it.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah.
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
You spoke about how those you do not want to be in the meeting. So let's say you have a new stakeholder who is coming from the waterfall part and who wants to be involved both the daily stand-up and the retro. How do you, as a Scrum Master, without being overburdened or without being, I don't know how to say, crossing your line, how would you be able to like engage that stakeholder not coming while you're not allowing them to come to those meetings?
Yeah, so we kind of rephrase that question a little bit. So it's not allowed, you're not denying them from coming. So you don't deny anyone from coming. You tell them the benefits of them not coming, of them not attending those meetings versus the benefit, the potential or the seemingly benefit of them attending those meetings. I think it's the conversation. Remember that all we're talking about is what they say versus what you say, but there's also the quotable quote of how you say it. So it's all about telling them. So if someone is coming from the waterfall, he's used to stabilization meeting, he's used to project planning meeting, he's used to requirements gathering meeting, he's used to project scoping meeting and milestone gathering meeting. So he knows all this, he's used to all those meetings, and they have these governance meetings that they all show up to. So he knows they love to be in meetings. And now you're telling them that, oh, well, this particular meeting is for the team, you cannot come. You got to tell them why they probably will not, and the invite will probably not be extended to them. We want to share with them that, hey, one of the reasons why this meeting will not be extended to you is because it's for the team, and this is some of the benefits why we want the team to have this meeting. If we're talking about a refinement session for that, for example, we want to tell them that, hey, we want this team to go, because we're going to go into the meats and the potatoes of these issues and these stories. We're going to do some discoveries. We're going to discuss. We're going to tax. We're going to estimate. We're going to delve into the meat. It might be better for you not to be there. It's going to be too on the low for you. You probably want something on a higher level, so there's no benefit for you to be there. And then again, you're not enforcing anything, you're not pushing anything, but you're sharing with them real life examples of, hey, this is what happened when they attended my meeting. I had a time when project manager or someone from Waterfall attended this meeting. The team members cringed. They didn't want to talk as much because their managers were in the room. So I think it's best practice that they don't attend as much, so we can get some traction from the development thing. So it's more about having the knowledge of what to say when that happens and having the right way of saying it. Godwin, make sense?
Thanks, sir.
And I have a go ahead, Mr. Godwin.
I'm done. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And I have a follow-up question on that. So, what if the stakeholder insists, regardless of, you know, all the effort to educate them and let them know reasons why they shouldn't be there, and what happens? What is the next possible actionable plan when if they insist?
Good question, Ahmed. So yes, it does happen. So sometimes you try to drive changes and you don't see the resultant effect of your changes. Think about it. When you started to drive a car, when you started to learn how to drive a car, when you got into the ignition and put it on the car, put the ignition and started the car, tried to drive, and maybe you hit something, hit a rock, hit a pebble, hit a signpost, you didn't throw away the car. We didn't throw away the car. Neither did you throw away yourself. And what I'm trying to say is that you don't exit the team, neither do you exit the stakeholder. So it's a collective effort. We're talking about leading practices. We're not saying that the moment the stakeholder sits in your room, the meeting shuts down, like the world just collapses on your meeting. It's not going to happen. That doesn't happen in real life. But we're talking about leading practices. We're talking about the consistency of you saying something. We're talking about the efficacy of best leading practices. So you try to drive a change, you're not seeing the result, you stay on it. That's why you're a change agent. Change agent cause change. You're not kicking anyone out. They show up to your meeting, but you're talking about it. In your engagements with that stakeholder, in your one-on-ones with them, you're constantly talking about, hey, you brought this up. Hey, we talked about, we think there's a divide between you coming to this meeting and not. You know, just having that conversation. You're not going to close the team. You're not going to sign up that, oh, I'm done from this team. You're not going to quit your job. You're just going to stick to the right course, which is the same way when you try to learn how to drive a car. You hit the signpost. You go back again to the car. You probably hit the pebble. Continue doing. You stayed on it. Stayed on it till you mastered how to drive.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions again?
Yeah, does anyone have any more questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, let's say like the sprint goal is there. I mean, and if the product owner, it pushes some new requirements in the middle of the sprint, but it's not putting the sprint goal into the risk. But although at the same time, the development team, they have already started working on the user stories, which they have committed at the beginning of the sprint. So how to go about this situation?
That's a good question, Atu, I'm telling you. So when the sprint goal is not in jeopardy, you guys are awesome. I'm telling you guys, just back my words. When your sprint goal is not in jeopardy, the team is fine. So if they change multiple stories within the sprint that really doesn't affect the goal of the sprint, the key critical goal of the sprint is still on autopilot. You guys are still on point there. It doesn't necessarily, it's a scope creep in terms of changing the capacities of the sprint and issues that goes into the sprint and out, but it necessarily does not change the goal of the sprint. That's why you create the buffer. That's why we talked about the buffer. The buffer allows you to absorb in work that are outside, that they still have the capacity on. Remember, they went in at 75% or 80% or whatever capacity of their percentage of their capacity. So they still have the buffer to absorb in work. And even if they have to take out work, the only thing you want to keep an eye on as a Scrum Master is the consistency of it. Is this a frequent? Is it a one-off change, or is this something that's going to be happening all the time? You want to keep an eye on it and make sure if it's a consistent pattern, you want to kind of talk about it in a space, in an open space. You want to talk about, hey, how can we improve? Is this something we need to tweak with the framework? Or do we need to create multiple requirements meeting upfront before we start a sprint planning? Or do we need to refine more? Or, there's a large set of conversation that we can have if it's just one-off. But if it's recurrent, then it gives birth to a bigger problem, a bigger question. So yes, if the goal of the sprint is not in danger, then listen, gentlemen, you guys are still all right.
So you mean to say sometimes it is okay, but if it's happening frequently, then we should have, I mean, one open conversation on it. It's not a
absolutely.
good practice. Yeah.
Correct. All right, I want to thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to me. I really appreciate the time. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much to Expert Agile Club, Luca, and the rest of the gangs. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, thanks
you,
again,
everyone.
Shibu.
Thank you so much.
The session was very, 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 really insightful and valuable. We learn a lot from all your speech and experience. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yep, I could agree with Atul. And also, if you have any more questions after this session, please feel free to leave them in the LinkedIn event page, and I'll go ahead and relay them over to our speaker.
Thank you.
Right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.